Good evening. This is Prince at camp. We just got back from camp yesterday, and my voice is not caught a break in a while now. Y'all know that I lost it earlier this month, and camp is terrible for your voice anyway. And so going into it, I was not full strength, but it held up better than I was expecting. So I can still talk, so I'll take that. But this is Prince at camp. He volunteered to give a Devo at night. So that's what he's doing here, pointing at someone. Looks like he might be pointing at praise, actually, which would be really funny. But anyway, I wanted to tell you that it went really well and wanted to brag a little bit on Prince and Praise and Peace. Since they're not here, we can talk well about them. So they are all, as y'all know, they're all awesome. And Peace and Praise got specifically pointed out to me by multiple counselors on how good they were. And Prince, actually, Prince is a little bit louder than Peace and Praise. So they created an award specifically for him, even though he left after a few days to go on a mission trip to Iowa. They created an award. He doesn't know this, so you know this before he does, specifically for him because of how involved he was in the Bible classes and how much of a leader he was. So if you get a chance, you see Prince and Praise and Peace running around, just let them know how valued they are, how special they are. And it's nice to see other people see that as well. Also, speaking of echoes, one of the other echoes, Gift, is one of our graduates for tonight, as well as Evelyn and Jenna. So I hope everybody can come back and celebrate with us. I was back there just before, and there's plenty of food, of cookies and ice cream back there. So come celebrate and congratulate our graduates and give them money or something. Just give them a card, something, whatever you can think of, or their youth minister. Money is also accepted for getting them through. No, but just come celebrate with us tonight. Now, I don't probably have to tell you that we're going through in our country what many people are calling culture wars, right? Seems like we have everybody at their throats, at each other's throats all the time. Broadly speaking, we have two sides, right, that are against each other, and two movements that are trying to decide the future of our country, in which direction we're going to go. Both sides are pretty aggressive at times. At least they can come across that way, right? Both sides have power, but both sides always think they're losing. And this is just a loop that we're in right now, and we keep going through it all the time. And what's happened with the culture wars and with all kinds of other influences in our society is that a whole lot of Christians don't really feel at home in a country in which they felt at home at one point. A whole lot of Christians feel as though our nation used to be something that is not now, and that we've lost something there, and that we no longer have the home that we felt that we had. I would bet that that's something almost everyone in this room feels. There's the feeling of not quite being at home in our country. And I was thinking about that as it pertains to a concept that I've been thinking a lot about lately. It's this word, exile. It's a concept that's all over the Bible. In fact, you could argue that everything from Genesis 3 to the end of the Bible is written from the perspective of exile. Exile is when a person or a group of people is banned from their home country, when they're forcefully removed from their home. That's exile. And that's really what a whole lot of the Bible is all about. If you know anything about the story of the Bible, you know that God chooses this one family, this one nation, the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. And he says, I'm going to bless the entire world through this one little nation. And so he's committed to them, right? Over and over again, the image of marriage is used for God and his people. He is in this deep, deep covenant with them. And they're blessed because of that. And they do a lot of good things, but they also do a whole lot of bad things. So to sum up the story, broadly speaking, eventually, after wandering and plagues and all kinds of crazy experiences, they end up in this land that God has promised them, in Israel, in the promised land. They're home. They're happy. They're free. They build a temple, and that's where God dwells. They're at home with their God. They have everything they needed. But as the centuries go by, the people become more and more and more terrible. They're corrupt, they're racist, they're selfish, they drink all the time, their leaders are just terrible leaders, their priests have completely given up their posts. They're not God's people anymore, even though they are. God's people have gone against their own God. And God didn't want to move out, right? He moved in the temple. He was at home with his people. He didn't want to leave. But eventually, he realized and told them, after many warnings, that it was time. It was time for him to leave his people and for his people to leave him, in a sense. And so he sends Babylon. He sends this evil nation, this army, to come and take his people away. That happens. There are several different exiles, but broadly speaking, it happens around 700 to 500 BC. And the people are taken away from their nation and deported to another country. And estimates would vary, but somewhere between a third and half of the Bible is directly written from that perspective. That's something I didn't realize, but as I've been studying it, it's crazy how much of your Bible is written from the perspective of exile, of people who either are about to go into exile and they know it, or they're in exile right now, or they've come back from exile, and now they've got to figure out how life works again at home in their home country. So this concept of exile plays a huge role in our Bibles, and how we got our Bibles, and in how they ended up the way that they are. Because these people were taken over, and their lives changed because of it. That's something that many of us haven't experienced. In America, we came into being as part of a rebellion where we won the war, and now we still exist, right? But there's this image, and it's maybe jarring for you. I think it's just a pretty jarring image in general, but I want you to see it because I think it will help us to enter into the mindset of exile. This image is from a show, The Man in the High Castle. And in case you can't tell what's going on here, this is the Statue of Liberty, but not, right? The German emblem is on it. It's on, I guess that's the Empire State Building in the background. And obviously the statue itself has changed. The concept of this show is that America and its allies lost World War II. And it just plays that out. It says, what would the world look like today if America and its allies had lost World War II? And it's a very interesting concept where part of the country is under German rule, part is under Italian, part is under Japanese rule. And it's just a very interesting what-if scenario. But with this image, with this concept of exile, of losing your home country, even if you still live in your home country, of losing what it stands for, of losing the freedom that we value so highly, I thought, this happened to God's people. I mean, think about how different our world would be. Think about how different our schools would be, our leaders would be, our religion would be, how different our world would be if this were reality. But this happened to God's people, to our family. They lost the war. They were home, and God was home with them. They were dwelling together. They had moved in together. So they had everything they wanted. But then exile happened. It's almost like when a movie is going a little bit too well. You've had this experience when you're watching a movie, and it just feels a little bit too pristine, right? It's just a little too nice. It's cool, but it's kind of hard to relate to. Because that's not life. Life isn't just walking through a field of daisies, right? Life has hardships. And that's what happens in the story of Israel, where this exile comes in and everything changes. He sends Babylon. Thousands of people die, and the people who survived are forcefully taken from their homes and made to be slaves in a foreign country. And hundreds of years of religion and tradition and home are just like that. They're gone. Hundreds of years of their nation. And overnight, they became minorities in a foreign land. They had been in the position of power. They ran their nation however they wanted to run it, but no more. Now, they were the minorities, the people who were powerless, who were on the margins. Imagine having to live with and serve the people who killed your family in front of you and destroyed your hometown, destroyed your nation. Imagine having to live in that situation. That being your reality. That was their reality. And I want you to see a few different passages that are in the Bible and communicate to us how deep the feelings of their despair were. The first one is in Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah 5, verses 25 through 30. It says, "The anger of the Lord was kindled against his people, and he stretched out his hand against them and struck them. And the mountains quaked, and their corpses were as refuse in the midst of the streets." They were just like trash in the streets. The corpses of God's own people were just trash in the streets. It says, "He will raise a signal for nations far away and whistle for them from the ends of the earth. And behold, quickly, speedily, they come." Now notice that. It's not just that Babylon, Assyria, the other nation that was part of the other really big exile. It's not just that Assyria and Babylon come in and take God's people. No, it says that God called for them to come. God brought this on his own people. It was a terrible act of love that he brought upon his own people. And the image here is that he's whistling for them to come from the ends of the earth. He says, "Come on, come take my people out." This is a traumatic experience for them. The text continues, "They're roaring," the roaring of these evil armies, these nations. "Their roaring is like a lion. Like young lions, they roar. They growl and seize their prey. They carry it off, and none can rescue. And if one looks to the land, behold, darkness and distress, and the light is darkened by its clouds." There was no sunshine in the land. It was just dark, at least in their mind, the metaphorical spiritual experience that they had in the land at this point. It's dark. They're surrounded by these lions. They've come and taken everything away from them. And there's nothing they could do. There's no rescue on the way from their perspective. That's it. Their home, their traditions, their religion, in many ways, was lost. One more text. This is Psalm 89, 38 to 47. I'm telling y'all, the concept of exile informs so much of the Bible. This psalm is written from that perspective. It says, "You have cast off and rejected. You are full of wrath against your anointed. You have renounced the covenant with your servant. You have defiled his crown in the dust." Let's just walk through those phrases. You've cast off and rejected. Now, we all can relate to that, right? We've all been rejected by people who we cared about, by people who we thought would never reject us. They say, "That's what you've done for us, God. You rejected us. You're full of wrath against your anointed, against the one that you have chosen. You're full of wrath against me. And you've renounced the covenant that we had, that marriage covenant that we had entered into. You've renounced it. And you've defiled my crown in the dust, my honor, my reputation, everything that I hold dear. You've thrown it in the dust and trampled on it." That's their perspective of God. And of course, this is one side of a story, right? Because they renounced the covenant and trampled on God's honor far before and far longer than God did to them. But this is their perspective. This is the pain that they feel. And the psalmist continues, "How long, O Lord? Will you hide yourself forever? How long will your wrath burn like fire? Remember how short my time is. For what vanity you have created all the children of man." In other words, my life is pointless if this is what my life is. You just created me to dwell in this existence, in this broken world where I'm not at home. It's pointless. That's their experience. One more text that I want you to hear, to enter into their mindset, their emotional state in exile. This is from Lamentations, so if you want to look it up, it'll be up here, but if you want to look at it in your Bible, you can go ahead and turn there. But right before the text that's going to be on the screen, in Lamentations 1, the author compares the experience of his nation to the experience of a woman who has terrible things done to her by a man. I won't, go farther along that route, and we won't read it because it's jarring to read, to think about. And of course, he's not making light of that experience. But his point is, this is how terrible what has happened is. This is how we feel. We feel defiled. We feel corrupted. We feel ripped out of everything that we knew. And this is Lamentations 1, 12 through 13. And it's written from the perspective of a widow who's lying in the street and nobody cares. Nobody cares about her plight. No one's there to help her. It's a poetic image that Lamentations is using here. And so the widow, standing for Israel, cries out, "Is it nothing to you, all who pass by? Look and see if there is any sorrow like my sorrow, which was brought upon me, which the Lord inflicted on the day of his fierce anger. From on high he sent fire. Into my bones he made it descend. He spread a net for my feet. He turned me back. He has left me stunned, faint, all the day long." This is not language that many Christians use today. We would never accuse God of any of these things, at least most of us. And yet this is language that's all over the Bible, and especially the Old Testament. It's all over the Psalms. It's all over Lamentations. It's all over the books that have come from exile. Because exile is not a fun experience. It's when you're ripped out of everything that you consider to be home and made to live in a different experience. And as we speak of Israel's exile, their exile was a terrible evil. It was terrible people doing terrible things. It wasn't good. But here's the thing. In life, if there's one thing that you learn in bad times, at least in my experience so far, if there's one thing that you learn in bad times, it's that there are things that you can't learn in anything else but bad times. I don't know if that makes sense, but there are lessons that we learn when we go through hard things in life that maybe we could have learned otherwise, but if you're like me, you probably needed something to shape you up, to help you learn that. And you needed that tough time to help you learn really good but really tough lessons. And that's what happens with the nation of Israel, this terrible experience that they have, this experience that hopefully we can relate to on some kind of an emotional level, reminded them of things that were incredibly valuable. And in the end, I don't know if they could have ever wished for exile, but in the end, the good that came from it was tremendous. The good that came from their wrestling with God, from the despair that they experienced, was something that was tough to measure, but incredibly valuable. One of the things that it reminded them is that their home was never their home. Israel, their homeland, was never their home. We read Psalm 89 just a minute ago, or part of Psalm 89, which is written from the context of exile. And it's not unintentional that Psalm 90 is the next psalm, because the first verse of Psalm 90 is this: "Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all generations." So Psalm 89 talks about how incredible, not in a good way, the experience of exile was for God's people. But Psalm 90 begins with this reminder: Lord, you have been our dwelling place in all our generations, even the generations in exile. You are our dwelling place. Israel, their home, was never supposed to be where they found their lasting security, their solace, their place of belonging. They could experience a taste of it there, but that was never supposed to be the ultimate home for them. God was their dwelling place. The Lord was their dwelling place. Their God was their home. Now, I know that you don't feel at home somewhere in your life. I know that because it's true about all of us. None of us feel at home everywhere in our lives. You might have places in your life where you feel more at home, but you also have places in your life where you probably feel at home almost none at all. Maybe it's in your family. Maybe in your family, you don't feel at home. Maybe it's at your job. Maybe it's in your school. Maybe it's in your church. Maybe it's in your friend group. somewhere you don't feel at home, even in a place where everyone thinks you should feel at home. You just don't. Maybe it's in your own body. You don't feel at home in your own body. In a place where everyone else seems to think you should feel at home, everyone else seems to feel at home. You don't, because we all don't. We all don't feel completely at home in some of these places, if not all of them. In our country, maybe your experience. That feeling, I want to suggest to you, is exile. And I think I'm going to continue this thought in some other sermons just to talk about how do we live in exile. But my main point for us tonight, that I want you to take home, that I want myself to take home, is this verse on the screen. This perspective, that the Lord is our dwelling place in all our generations, no matter what happens, no matter how I feel in my family, in my church, in my school, in my job, in my friend group, no matter how I feel at home or not at home. The Lord is my dwelling place in my generation and in yours. In 1 Peter 1 verse 1. Oh, this verse. I guess I got ahead of myself. In 1 Peter 1 verse 1, Peter begins his letter by saying, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles. Okay, that's kind of noteworthy if we're coming from the perspective of so much of the Bible being written from the perspective of exile. It's noteworthy that Peter would call these people exiles, right? When you see the word exile here, you should upload our perspective from the Old Testament, because exile for Peter is the exile that his people have experienced. So when you see exile, think the exile that they experienced, the exile of Lamentations, of Psalm 89, of the other texts that we've read. So that's noteworthy. But here's what's interesting. Peter is not writing to exiles. Peter isn't writing to people who have been forcefully removed from their homes, banned from their home nation. He's not writing even to Jews who historically have been exiled. He's mainly writing to Gentiles, to people who live down the street from where they grew up, to people who live in their homes, who've never been exiled before. We can see this by reading the rest of the letter. We won't go through that, but he's not writing to exiles. So why does he call them exiles? Well, I think it's because these people understand what we're getting at. Peter, at least, is trying to help them understand that their circumstances, their experience of the world, the people around them don't have to define who they are or what they're about or where they belong. Their experience of the world doesn't have to be their home. It doesn't have to dictate where they feel at home. The homelessness that we feel here on earth, that's exile. That's what that feeling is. The longing that we all feel for something else, it's exile. We know that we're not totally at home. And that's exile. But the most striking word in this verse, 1 Peter 1 and verse 1, isn't even the word exile. That's pretty striking because it's strange. He's not writing to exiles, but he calls them exiles. But that's not even the most striking word. To me, the most striking word is the word before it, the word that he uses to describe the exiles. Elect. You are elect exiles. Most of us, when we think of elect or election, we think of this, right? We think of I voted, because that's our experience in our nation. When you elect a politician, when you elect something, you choose it, right? Out of all of the options that you could choose, you choose that one thing. You elect that one thing. That's what Peter says we are. He says we are elect exiles. And I know some people take this too far. I don't think that I don't think that God sovereignly chooses us apart from our free will. I don't think that we have to give up free will to serve God. I don't think that's true at all. So some people take this too far. But I think there's a temptation also to take it the other direction, where we just completely ignore that this is in the Bible, that words like predestined and elect and chosen are all over the Bible, and they apply to you and to me. By our free will, yes, but also God plays a role in choosing us. It's not an either or, it's a both and, where we work together. God and humans work together, just like always. So in some deep sense that maybe we can't even understand, God chooses, he elects us. Now, what's interesting about this is that as exiles, we don't feel at home. We don't feel as though we belong in this world. At least in some sense. We don't feel that we belong at home. We don't feel that sense of at-homeness. But even given that reality, Peter says, even given the reality of exile, there's also the reality of election. That yes, you're not at home, but you're also chosen. You may not feel like you belong, but you belong here because you are chosen. You are elected by God. And that tension, the tension between those two realities, is one that I think we have to live into as disciples of Jesus. To realize that, yes, we're not at home in our current experience of this world. We're not at home maybe in our country, in our school, in our job, in our family, in our friend group. We're not at home. But also, the Lord is our dwelling place in all generations. We are his people. We are elect, chosen by him. These words from Isaiah 43 are powerful, and they pertain to being chosen by God. Thus says the Lord, he who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. You are precious in my eyes and honored, and I love you. God elects his people. God elects you and me. He's called us by name. We're precious to him. We are chosen, and he loves us. That reality, I think, is strong enough to get us through anything that we experience in exile here on earth. Any feeling of homelessness that we feel here on earth. I want to finish by reading together Psalm 46. The entire psalm, I think it's only 11 verses, so it's not very long. But it's, again, written from the perspective of exile. And I don't really have anything fancy planned. I just want to read it together. It'll be up here on the screen. And just remember that where it's coming from. It's coming from this place of God's people being exiled. Where it's coming from the place of them feeling like there's fire in their bones. It's coming from the place of Lamentations and Psalm 89 and Isaiah 5. It's coming from this really terrible place. But notice where it goes. Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. That faith in God, the faith in God that says, yes, even though the world around me is falling apart, even though I can't control everything that I want to control in my world, the faith that says, yes, that's happening, but still, I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to be still and know that he is God and I'm not, and he's in control, I'm not. That faith is the faith that withstands exile. That is the faith of God's elect. It's the faith that says no matter how I feel here on earth, I am precious, I am chosen, I am loved by God himself. And that reality is enough to say, even though I'm not at home, the Lord is my dwelling place in all the generations of his people, including mine. So I hope you can take that with you this week And if you have a moment tonight, tomorrow, if you think about it, take 5 minutes. Just be still and meditate on God's being your dwelling place. Be still and know that He is God. No matter what's happening around us, He is God. And you and I aren't. And aren't we thankful for that? If you need to take the first step in discipleship this evening, and you need to be baptized into Jesus to walk with Him, why don't you do that as we stand and sing together?